1 John chapter 4. I'm going to read verses 1 through 6. Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. And this is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming, and even now is already in the world. You, dear children, are from God and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. They are from the world and therefore speak from the viewpoint of the world, and the world listens to them. We are from God, and whoever knows God listens to us, but whoever is not from God does not listen to us. And this is how we recognize the spirit of truth and the spirit of falsehood. All right, let me start off this morning with some real encouragement to you. I want you to kind of get ready to think with me a little bit. I want you to think of the 3 dumbest things you have ever done in life. Now, don't share them out loud, but just kind of get them in your head. I'm going to give you a minute because I want to make sure you got them, all right? The 3 dumbest things you have ever done in your life. Do you got 1 or 2 in your head right now? Now, some of those dumbest things we can laugh about today. We might be able to laugh about 10 years from now. That's the nature of some of the dumb things we do. We can look back and we can laugh about them. But some of those dumb things, we're not going to be laughing about. We're not going to laugh about today. We're not going to laugh about 10 years from now. And as we think about those top 3 things, and your list is probably longer than 3, and my list is a lot longer than 3. Wouldn't it have been great if you had a friend who, before you did the dumb thing, kept you from doing the dumb thing? Wouldn't that have been really good? If you'd had a friend that kind of stopped you in the road, if you had a group of friends that stopped you in the road and kept you from doing that thing that you've done. We all have some regrets in our lives. We all have some things that we wish we could have made a different choice. Now let me broaden our thinking this morning, because some of us struggle to think about that top 3 dumb things we've done. We kind of live life only forward. We don't keep any memory, and that's sometimes a good thing. But let me encourage you to think of someone in your life that frustrates you to no end. Now don't look down the road. Just keep eye contact up here, okay? Don't do that. But somebody in your life who just frustrates you to no end because they just can't seem to make good decisions. They don't use common sense. They do things that constantly put them deeper in the hole. Deeper in the hole financially, deeper in the hole relationally, deeper in the hole emotionally, deeper in the hole spiritually. And they are constantly in that mode. And they've been in your life for maybe a few weeks or a few years, or they've been in your life forever. And it seems like they are consistently on the wrong path, consistently reading the map upside down. They're consistently clueless and foolish and a bunch of other phrases that we don't use in church buildings. But you kind of know the person I'm thinking about, right? You kind of got that person in your head and in your heart. Here's what I've noticed. Here's what I've noticed in the life of a pastor for some 20-odd years. When people are in distress in the community of faith, when I get around the situation, when I become aware of the situation, here's what I often see that's going on. One is that the people around the person are not in any way, shape, or form surprised by the situation the person is in. That they saw this thing coming from miles away. And so the ones around them have known that they were on the wrong path, knew that they were digging the hole deeper, knew that they were making a bigger mess, and were either unwilling or unable to speak into that person's life and to encourage them to make a different decision. And friends, I've been there. I kind of almost live there. It's like, oh boy, here's somebody in a tough spot. Here's somebody making a wrong decision. Do I want to risk my relationship with them to kind of come alongside them and to encourage them to make a different decision? So you kind of know what I'm talking about. I see that consistently. Very rarely have I seen somebody make a colossally bad decision and their community around them say, oh my gosh, I was totally surprised by that. It's usually like, yeah, that's kind of been how that one has been for a while. So that's one way I see it. The other way I see it is that people who are doing dumb things tend to surround themselves with people who are doing dumb things. Have you noticed that? And that just doesn't happen with teenagers, by the way. That has no age discrimination to it at all. People who are doing dumb things surround themselves with people who are doing dumb things. And they get together, and guess what? It doesn't get smarter. And often we form small groups around that, right? I mean, I've been there. I've been a part of that group. And so those are the two things I noticed. One, that we're unwilling, we're unable, we're nervous about speaking up when people are heading in the wrong direction, or that we just kind of do this group thing and we're all just heading in a bad direction. Well, what do you do? What do you do when that's happening? Well, John and many of the leaders of the New Testament church had to deal with that kind of issue pretty regularly. And John, in the passage that I just read, is talking to a young congregation, a young church. And they're struggling to make good decisions. They're struggling to help each other out. They're struggling to love each other enough to speak up, to help the other make good decisions. And John encourages them to learn discernment. It's a wonderful, wonderful word. It's a wonderful practice, but boy, it's hard to do. And he says to this congregation, learn discernment, test the spirits, test what you are hearing in life. Is it from God? Now, the main issue they are struggling with is the question of who is Jesus Christ. They've got a challenge in the believing issue. And there are some running around in that day that are teaching that Jesus was just spirit and that he wasn't truly flesh. And so John says, if they start with that nonsense, they're not from God. And there was a group in his church that that taught that Jesus could not have possibly been God made human. And so they either said he was God but only appeared human, or that he was human and only appeared divine. And in the early church, that's a big conversation. And when they worship together, unlike what we do today, where we've got professional clergy who do this kind of thing, when they worship together, they would just kind of speak up. What God been doing in your life? What's God saying to your life? And they would just speak out on that. And John says, when you're worshiping and people are just speaking out, test it and make sure that that word comes from God. Now, I feel mostly confident that if I were going to give you the test that John is talking about with this young congregation, that we would all pass that test. I mean, we got 2,000 years of church history now. Most of us have been in church for a number of years. And we're pretty comfortable with the idea that Jesus was fully God, 100% God, and 100% human, fully human. The great mystery of the incarnation. We pretty much are comfortable with that. And we've got the idea that he lived among us. He did miraculous things. He was an incredible teacher. And he was crucified. And 3 days later, he rose to life before ascending back to the Father. And we take that biography of Jesus almost for granted. But that was still up for discussion among people in the early church. So I'm not too worried that we would pass that test today. The test that I'm worried about is the one that we mentioned a few weeks ago when the word Antichrist came up the first time in 1 John. And here it is again in verse 3. The test that I'm worried about is that we will create a substitute for Christ. That we will settle for less than Christ in our lives. Less than Christ in our marriages, less than Christ in our families, less than Christ in our work, less than Christ in our church. That we'll settle for less than Christ. That we'll fail that test. That we'll create a substitute for Christ. And friends, we can make a lot of things sound spiritual that aren't of Christ. So let me give you some of those spiritual sounding things that kind of circle in my world. Again, we could probably spend the rest of the day just coming up with this list. I hear things like you have to have a special calling to be a missionary. And I don't have that calling, so I'm off the hook, right? I'll pray for them. You've got to pray for those missionaries. But I don't have that calling. And so somebody else will do it. Or God wants me to do what I'm passionate about. And so I'm just going to do what I'm passionate about because that's what God wants me to do. You say things like, God told me to, and then we fill in the blank. Those are some of my favorite conversations. God told me to fill in the blank. Now, I don't want to discredit God telling us stuff. That's good. But let me encourage you, when God tells you, see if he also told somebody else. Right? Because I got this really big view of God that, you know, he can talk to me, but he can also talk to others. And maybe confirm some of that. But we do a lot of this. Or I hear things like, praise the Lord, Dan, I got a job offer this week with a 5% raise. Isn't God good? Right? If our wealth, if our career success is going up, it must be of God. Or I would be more generous if I didn't have so much debt. Right? We can make all kinds of things sound spiritual and try to make them of God. But they're not. We have substituted our desires for his. And while John's telling this congregation, test the teachers, test the people who are speaking, make sure you know what it is that they're saying, that it is from God. Now, I'm not saying we don't need to test some teachers and some preachers, but we might need to be more focused on testing ourselves. And we might need to be a little more aware of the sin of self-deception. That's my challenge. John, in his gospel, wrote these words, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And that's good. That's good stuff. The truth will liberate us. But the truth is that we are good at deceiving ourselves. The truth is that we're really good at looking for sound reasons to support our unsound, our dumb decisions. Remember how we started this message? What's that list of the 3 or 5 or 25 things, dumb things that we've all done? And that feeling that we had once we realized what a dumb decision that was. See, often I'm in conversation with folks who realize what a dumb decision they made was back then, and then guess what they want to do next? They want to make 5 more dumber decisions. They go deeper, and that's the way it works, doesn't it? This is the way it works in my life. You let me make 2 dumb decisions, the next 25 are pretty easy, right? And so you've got to get over the sin of self-deception and see what's going on. And we're prone to say to each other, would you just use some common sense, Dan? Would you stop going down that road? And we need to more gently and lovingly say, like John says, would you just stop deceiving yourself? Can we just be honest with each other? And when we stop deceiving ourselves, then we can look at the real reasons for our behavior. And we can be honest with ourselves. And as John says, that truth will set you free. It can be incredibly liberating when we are honest with ourselves. So John says, test the spirits, test the teachers, find out what's the real motivation for what they are teaching. And we need to find out the real story for our self-deception. And that'll take some work. That takes some hard work. Let me just try to give you some sentences that might help. The real reason I lie about my family is what? The real reason I filed for divorce is what? The real reason we moved in together was what? The real reason I won't call my kids or my kids won't call me is what? The real reason I have this credit card debt is what? The real reason I'm so incredibly busy is what? The real reason I drink so much. The real reason I quit going to church. See, it's hard work. But that's the work where Jesus meets us. He tells us there's truth, and that truth will set you free. You see, we're really good at self-deception. In our culture, you almost have to be. But John's encouraging this young congregation, he's encouraging us, test the spirits. Test what you're saying. Is it of God? And then I want to make sure you hear what John says to this congregation. After he tells them, test the spirit, and that sounds kind of a tough word. Listen to how he talks to them. John says, you dear children. Remember how he talked about how great the love the Father has lavished on us that we should be called the children of God. And then he says, you dear children. You're from God. And you've overcome them. Because the one who is in you is greater than the one who's in the world. And we're going to move past self-deception. It's a believing issue. We got to understand we're children of God. And that doesn't say a lot about what's inside of me other than that God's inside of me. And that the power of God is available through me. You, dear children. Did you hear the gentleness in those words from John to that congregation? Do you hear the love that John has for his congregation? I think the hard thing for us as we seek to help each other to test and to discern the spirits and to move away from self-deception is to love each other now so that we can fully experience Christ. And not all the substitutes for Christ that have so quickly gotten our attention. So how are we going to talk to each other when we're doing dumb things? And how are we going to talk to ourselves See, a lot of that becomes real negative talk real fast. Listen again, John, verse 1, dear friends. Verse 4, dear children. And so if we're going to get where we need to be in our relationship with God and our relationship with each other, a lot of it's how we just talk to each other with gentleness, with hope, with the complete foundation that you are loved. You're a child of God. So instead of, I can't believe you did that, or I can't believe I did that, right? See, the self-talk is often harder. And learn to tell each other truth in a way that draws us closer to Christ. See, I've hung out with a lot of people in my life, and I've been this person. When you hang out in church as long as I have. People who say, well, I just told them the truth. They didn't like it, but that's all right. My job was to tell them the truth. And no, that's wrong. If we don't tell the truth in a way that draws people to the truth, then we're not doing it right. John loves this congregation, loves these children. And he understands they've gotten off track on their theology in a few spots. He just reminds them of who they believe in. He reminds them how to get back on track. So that we learn to tell each other the truth in a way that draws us closer to each other and closer to Christ. Friends, that'll be powerful. And we're humans. And we're probably always going to have a list of the top 3 dumb things or the top 4 things we wish we wouldn't have done. But I promise you, if you'll get around a community of faith who loves you, who will speak truth into your life when you need to hear it, we're going to be much more like the congregation John is encouraging in this passage. I've been fortunate throughout my life, not intentionally, but have been very fortunate to have people in my life that could speak truth in a way that drew me closer to Jesus Christ. And so the priority of my life is those people in my life get my calendar. They get my time. I want to spend a lot of time with them. I want to always make sure I'm listening to what God is telling me through others. We all need those groups. We all need those people. And John's saying as we find those folks, we'll be drawn closer to him, closer to each other. Will you pray with me?